So, I was driving in the car the other day with my kiddo, and we were talking about learning all the notes in different keys. And I decided to explain it to them using the tetrachord approach because I think it's important to have all your scales memorized and know what note is where in any key. And the reason for that is just it makes communication a little bit easier. As guitar players, a lot of times we play well, but we don't know how to communicate with other musicians. And so the idea of the major tetrachord is very simple, and you can pretty much memorize it. So you start on a note. I'm going to start on C. You go up a whole step to D. You go up another whole step to E. And then you go up a half step to F. So that's the C major tetrachord. You always have to have a half step between the third and fourth note every time. Okay? If you don't have a half step, you need to sharp or flat something to make that happen. And you need whole steps between 1 and 2 and between 2 and 3. So how this works, we're going to learn the tetrachords in a certain order. We're going to learn the C tetrachord, and then we end it on F. You notice that's a perfect fourth from C to F because this is a major tetrachord. So, this interval is the definition of a perfect fourth. So now we're going to go up a whole step from where we ended. So a whole step above F is G. And we're going to make a G major tetrachord. So G, up a whole step to A, up a whole step to B, and up a half step to C. No big deal. And then again, we're going to go up a whole step from where we ended. So we have a C tetrachord, we have a G tetrachord, and these are major tetrachords. A whole step above C is D, so we're going to start on D. And we go up a whole step to E. And then we go up another whole step, and F doesn't work because D to E is only, or E to F is only a half step. So we're going to make that an F sharp. And now, miraculously, we have a whole step from 1 to 2, a whole step from 2 to 3. And now if we make this a G, we have a half step from 3 to 4. And so you can already see that we're going to start adding sharps, right? So a whole step above G is A. So that'll be our next tetrachord, A, B. Again, here we run into a problem. This is only a half step. So I got to make this C into a C sharp. And then a half step above C sharp is D. And you'll notice we have two tetrachords that don't have any sharps at all. And with these two tetrachords, we had a sharp on the third note. Okay, so once you get a sharp in a certain place, it always stays. So all the rest of our tetrachords are going to have a sharp on the third note as well, as you'll see. So a whole step above D is E. So now we are on this E tetrachord. After E comes F sharp, that's a whole step. After F sharp comes G sharp, that's a whole step. And after G sharp comes A, that's a half step. And two things you'll notice here. We still have a sharp on the third note, but also F has reappeared and it's sharp again. Once a note has been sharped, it's always going to be sharp. So all our Fs are going to be sharped from now on. And you'll see that as we go on. So let's go on. A whole step above A, right? Let me need to move this up here. Hopefully I don't run out of room. A whole step above A is B, so we're going to do a B tetrachord. B, and then a whole step to C sharp. Again, we already had a C sharp. A whole step to D sharp, and then a half step to E. And again, we have two tetrachords that have two sharps, right? We had two with no sharps, two with one sharp, and two with two sharps. Okay, a whole step above E is F sharp. Whole step above F sharp is G sharp. Whole step above G sharp is A sharp. And a half step above A sharp is B. I'm just going to say it again. We always need a whole step from 1 to 2, whole step from 2 to 3, half step from 3 to 4. That's the recipe for a major tetrachord. And then we go up a whole step from B, right? Because that's how we're creating these tetrachords. So a whole step above B is C sharp. Whole step above C sharp is D sharp. Whole step above D sharp is E sharp. And I know you want to call that an F, but it's not an F because we're going to go up the alphabet, and we already have an F. A half step above E sharp is F sharp. Okay, so you might be dying to call this E sharp here an F. I implore you not to do that, okay? E sharp is a note, and, people like to complain about it. It's useful, okay? It's a major third from C sharp to E sharp. C, D, E, that's what feels like a third to me, okay? All right. Now, you'll notice we only have one tetrachord that has 3 sharps. Yeah, that's just the way it is. But we do have 2 tetrachords that have all sharps, because a whole step above F sharp is G sharp. G sharp, A sharp, B sharp. Again, same logic as the E sharp, right? Because we can't have a C because we already have a C sharp. Now we have to be done at G sharp, okay? And this is where this is important, okay? So I can't go and make a D sharp major tetrachord for anything useful, because if I did D sharp and a whole step above D sharp, well, that would be E sharp, also known as F, right? And a whole step above E sharp would be F double sharp, also known as G. And a half step above F double sharp would be what? G sharp, I guess. So, all right, this is a big fat no. Like we don't want double sharps in our major scales and our tetrachords. Okay, we can respell this as an E flat tetrachord. There's no reason to have a D sharp tetrachord. So, just I don't have a problem with double sharps as accidentals, but I don't want them in my key signatures. Okay, so here now we have all of the major tetrachords that have naturals or sharps in existence. And first of all, it's easy to memorize them. Okay, you can memorize any one of these super quickly, and that's kind of the point, is to know all the notes in your scale. I was teaching a lesson the other day, and my student couldn't find the 5th of the key. Right, like that's important. You got to know where the 5th of every chord is. You got to know where the 5th of every key is. It's like one of your main points of navigation, right? And this isn't even about finding it on the guitar. That's a whole nother topic. This is just about pure knowledge and understanding. So how does this become a major scale? Well, it's actually very simple. If you take any 2 tetrachords in this list and combine them, you get a major scale. So the lower tetrachord of C major is C, D, E, F, and the upper tetrachord of C major is G, A, B, C. So that's your C major scale. Now, let me undo that. I can do the same thing starting on G. Okay, right here, that's my G major scale. Okay, so G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. In other words, you can think of a major scale as being made up of a lower and an upper tetrachord. And the upper tetrachord of one scale becomes the lower tetrachord of the next scale when you're going through the cycle of fifths. And I don't think I've mentioned it yet, but if you look right here along this leftmost line here, right along here, that's your cycle of fifths. So again, same deal. If I start on D, there is my D major scale. Okay, and it has 2 sharps. All right, and then if I start on A, there's my A major scale with 3 sharps. Okay, if I start on E, my E major scale with 4 sharps. B major scale. All right, so again, if you memorize these tetrachords, if you've memorized the B major tetrachord is B, C sharp, D sharp, E, and the F sharp major tetrachord is F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B, you can memorize all the scales. I was able to teach my kiddo all the major scales with sharps inside of like a 45-minute drive from Ann Arbor to Detroit. Okay, key of F sharp, 6 out of 7 possible sharps, right? Everything is sharped except for B. And then last would be C sharp, all sharps, right? So there you have that. Now, that gives you all your sharp keys. This method works great. Here's the whole thing here. If you're trying to learn all your keys, well, I mean, I'm just going to rewrite this right next to where we did. You know, I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. I would recommend learning the sharp keys first if you're going to do this method, because you start with C and you keep adding sharps. And now I'm actually going to start, this might seem strange to some people, but I'm going to start with C flat, all flats, right? So we're going to do all the flat keys, but instead of starting with, we're not going to do the cycle of fourths, which I know a lot of people might want to do it that way. And you know, if you already know your cycle of fourths and you already know all the keys, then awesome. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to show that if C, D, E, F, that's whole, half, if that's true, then flatting everything is also whole, half, right? So C flat to D flat is a whole, D flat to E flat is a whole, E flat to F is a half step, right? And then a whole step above F flat is G flat. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Okay, whole step above F flat is G flat, A flat, B flat, C flat, a whole step above C flat is D flat, E flat, F natural, right? To get a whole step above E flat is F natural. So we're, instead of gaining sharps, we're losing flats. It's the same thing, okay? And a whole step above G flat is A flat, B flat, C natural, D flat. And again, let's just look at this. Everything that was natural is now flat. Everything that was sharp is now natural. So again, we have 2 that have all flats. We have 2 that have just 3 flats instead of 4 flats, right? Okay, and if I just continue this idea, then a whole step above D flat is E flat, a whole step above E flat is F, a whole step above F is G, and a half step above G is A flat. And if you remember our D sharp tetrachord that didn't exist, well, here's our D sharp tetrachord. It's an E flat tetrachord. Okay, whole step above A flat is B flat, whole step to C, whole step to D, half step to E flat. And again, 2 that only have 2 flats and 2 naturals. Continuing on, whole step above E flat is F, G, A, B flat. And just like there was only one scale that had 3 sharps, one tetrachord that had 3 sharps, I apologize. There's only one tetrachord that has 3 naturals. Okay, so F is special, F sharp is special. All right, and then a whole step above B flat is C, which is actually where we started, right? We started on C initially, but I'm still going to write one more, G, A, B, C. And now you can kind of see there's overlap here. Basically, there's a lot of overlap, actually. The D flat tetrachord is the same as the C sharp tetrachord. The A flat tetrachord is the same as the G sharp tetrachord. Okay? The G flat tetrachord is the same as the F sharp tetrachord. The C flat tetrachord is the same as the B tetrachord, which actually means that there are, it gives us all 15 of our major scales, because there are 3 scales that can be named what we call enharmonically, okay? So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that B major is C flat major. Okay, they're the same. F sharp major is G flat major, right? Okay, if I'm figuring something out by ear and I want to write it down, I could write it in F sharp major or in G flat major. Or I could, pick something in an easier key. C sharp major is D flat major, right? So there's overlap. Yeah, so, maybe this is helpful for you. Maybe it's not. Maybe you see some things in these patterns that are useful. For me, I have found that I get to play with many different musicians because I am able to communicate without sounding like, let's see, it's hard to, how do I put this? Wow, I'm such a good communicator. Just having an understanding of how music works that is well-rounded and being able to communicate those ideas to people in a kind way, I have found is very useful in keeping rehearsals running smoothly and in making it so I get to play with all kinds of musicians and I get to have fun when I'm doing it, right? There's not a lot of vibing out on the stage when I'm playing. It's pretty much a fun time because we treat each other like people. And I know that might not seem like it pertains to understanding your major scales, but I just think the more that you understand and the more different ways you can conceive of things, the better you'll be at communicating with clarity and kindness at the same time. So, all right, there you go.